You're listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. Today we're going to talk about hormones. I think it's really important when you look over social media, you look in Facebook groups, the questions that people ask about confidence and brain fog and menopausal, perimenopausal or menstrual problems that are linked with their riding confidence. Or very often someone will just put out there that they feel as though they've lost their confidence. And in the comments, I can guarantee that one person will say, "Are you menopausal, perimenopausal?" Talk a little bit about pre-menstruation, that time before you have a period. Also, I'm going to talk about perimenopause, menopause, because at some point, women are going to go through these vast changes in their hormonal landscape. And sometimes these changes feel like they're a hidden force behind our riding. So if you've ever thought of yourself as becoming less brave than you used to be or not as confident, and if you are still having periods, you notice that it happens at certain times of the month, or if you've stopped having regular periods, that you are wondering, is it linked to perimenopause or menopause? Then, first of all, I'm here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with any of this, and it's possible to work together with our bodies. Your bodies during these times are navigating really powerful internal disruptions, and what these symptoms are simply the way that the body tries to get back some kind of equilibrium. If we can understand a little bit more about what's happening to us physiologically, then we can treat ourselves with a little bit more self-compassion. We can understand what's going on, but also we can implement some strategies that help us to simply get through this without having some of the major symptoms that women can have. So first of all, let's think about what's happening inside our bodies during these times. Hormones, as we know, like estrogen and progesterone, regulate reproduction, but they also have quite wide-reaching effects on other parts of the body. They can affect your brain chemistry, they can affect your emotions, they can overload your liver, they can affect your energy levels, they can affect your glucose levels. So in the second half of your menstrual cycle, so the days leading up to your period, progesterone rises and then it drops, and estrogen is also dropping. And similarly, during perimenopause and menopause, estrogen levels, as we know, start to fall off, and those levels can become quite unpredictable at first, and then during menopause become consistently lower. So it's this low titer or low amount of the estrogen that's causing some of the problems. Let's have a little think about what's happening in these situations where we've got low estrogen. So estrogen, first of all, I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that it affects our body, and in particular, how that impacts our confidence. I'm going to talk about serotonin, the happy hormone. I'm going to talk about our adrenals and cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. And I'm going to talk about glucose levels. So serotonin, first of all. Estrogen is known to be a natural booster of serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter. So less estrogen means less serotonin. Less serotonin means more mood swings, more self-doubt, more anxiety. So during these times, you might find yourself second-guessing things that you would normally do without hesitation. You might feel some fear or anxiety or self-doubt in a particular aspect of your riding, or you may find yourself worrying more about what-ifs. you might become more sensitive to what others are saying or what you think others might be thinking. And it's not all in your head. A bit of it is in your head, of course, but it's the hormones behind these mental and emotional changes that are dictating what's in your head. So when we know we can start to we can't divorce ourselves from our hormones, but you can start to see reasons behind the change in your riding and your riding confidence. And when you see reasons for it, you almost become a little bit more logical about it and say, well, actually, this isn't me. This is just some hormone level that's making me think that, but it's not real. It's not really me. The second thing that you can think about, another layer, when we're talking about perimenopause and menopause, are the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys. We've got one on each kidney, and these produce an array of hormones. And when we're in perimenopause and menopause, they become the major, if not only, source of our estrogen. Now, because they also produce other hormones, including cortisol, then they've obviously got other jobs to do. So it's a bit like, when you're at work and you've got loads and loads to do, and somebody just comes along and dumps a whole load more work on you, and you're, well, I can't do it all. I'll do what I can, but I can't take over somebody else's whole job. And that's a little bit like what the adrenals are doing. They don't make as much estrogen as the ovaries, but they make some. But they do have their own jobs to do as well, and they become a priority. So in those cases, when the adrenal glands are busy making stress hormones, for example, they're not necessarily making estrogen at the same rate. So we've mentioned that estrogen lowers our serotonin. So this is another way that the estrogen gets lowered. When our body becomes stressed, we make cortisol. And we can think of stress in different ways. We can think of it in non-scientific, everyday ways. So we've got too much on our plate, we're doing too much, and that is the general meaning of stress. So in those cases, our bodies make cortisol. But in non-scientific terms, it can mean when the body is out of an equilibrium and there's a little bit of stress, because that means work to bring back whatever happens to be out of kilter. So, for example, if we just had a massive meal of sugar, then that's not good for our system. The body wants to bring us back. It wants to lower the blood sugar so that we're in the nice, even keel. And that includes an aspect of cortisol. So your adrenal glands begin to make cortisol because that's considered a stress physiologically. So if stressors are very evident in our life, whether it is work, family, horses, whatever it might be, your adrenal glands can become quite tired. They're making the cortisol. The cortisol levels can be quite high, which cortisol levels being high naturally make you feel either a bit wired or a bit anxious, or it may be overwhelmed, and it may decrease your resilience, or let's say it can decrease your confidence. But in those cases where you've got high levels of cortisol, your adrenal glands are becoming fatigued, they're a bit overloaded, then they can't always make estrogen, or as much estrogen as you would like. So this lowering of the estrogen then, not only because our ovaries aren't making it, but maybe our adrenal glands are a bit tired as well. So it's a bit of a double whammy there. I want to talk now about glucose, because glucose levels are something that we can affect ourselves. We can change our diet. There's a particular publication by Zoe, the people who make the glucose monitors, and it's called Diet Quality is Associated with Lower Prevalence of Menopausal Symptoms. So in other words, to some extent, in some women, what we eat can change our menopausal symptoms. And one of the ways that it does this is through glucose. And more specifically, it's through the spikes in glucose that we get when we eat a meal or a treat or a snack that contains carbohydrate of any kind. So when we eat carbohydrate, whether it's sugary, and it's very obviously sugar, it's very obviously glucose or sucrose, or it's starchy, like rice or potatoes or pasta, then you get an elevation in your glucose in your blood. Now, what the body does is it wants to come back to a lower level, so you get hormones like insulin, which reduce the amount of blood sugar and have the cells take it up. So if you have something that's very sweet or a very starchy meal, then a certain length of time afterwards, depending on how much you've eaten, could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, could be a couple of hours, then you may get a craving for something that's sweet again. And that's a little bit of a crash. And so what's happened here is that the glucose level has risen, but then the insulin has caused the uptake of the glucose by the cells. So that means it's cleared some of the glucose from your blood. And now you're in a bit of a crash and you're craving sugar again. Now, those things, those ups and downs in the blood sugar, that is something that as we age as women, these glucose spikes, this high and this low, aggravates our menopausal symptoms. In fact, our ability to deal with sugar and the size of our glucose spikes increases when we're perimenopausal and menopausal. So it's not great to have these great big rises in glucose, these glucose spikes and these glucose lows again. What we need to do is kind of flatten out the curve. Glucose spikes may slow down the interaction between two neurons. So the passing of information between two neurons with the glucose spikes can give some people brain fog. And if we, as perimenopausal or menopausal women, have higher spikes, then you can see this is why we get more brain fog. That glucose spike, as I said before, also causes us to feel stressed, causes us to feel that we're losing confidence. We might feel a little bit on edge more. We might have the self-doubt. So what we want to do is to flatten out the glucose spikes. Now let's just pause for breath for a moment. Now that we understand what's going on inside us, it becomes very empowering to know this invisible set of hormonal changes that's very misunderstood and actually not entirely understood by biochemists, physiologists and experts in the field. But it's also great to know that this is a natural process. This means that your neurology, your nervous system isn't failing you. It's simply that your body requires a different kind of support now. So let's have a think about what we can do. So if you still have periods, then it's a really good idea to track your cycle so that you know your mood patterns and you know the days when you're going to be premenstrual and you can ride accordingly. You can do something simple or maybe don't ride at all. Maybe you don't feel up to riding. The next thing that we can do is to think about those sugar levels, because they seem to spark off a cascade of reactions, and they're something that we can physically manipulate, if you like. So eating low sugar foods. Investigate someone called the Glucose Goddess. She's all over YouTube. She's written books, and I think they're really excellent. She's a biochemist. She explains it in everyday language, and she talks about how these spikes in glucose can be balanced out. And it's not a drastic diet change by any means, and you can learn how to flatten those curves and reduce the symptoms. And what's nice is, although I've talked about anxiety and I've talked about riding anxiety and the impact of blood sugar, then dealing with your blood sugar can also help to reduce and possibly get rid of some of the other menopausal symptoms, so hot flashes, for example, and the brain fog. One of the big things that the Glucose Goddess talks about is having a savoury breakfast, and she also has some other little hacks that you can do that are really easy, just little tweaks here and there to just decrease these huge spikes. The next thing to do is to think about resting your poor old adrenals as much as you can. So this means getting calmer, doing practices that keep you calm, even for just portions of the day, or even just a few minutes every day. This may have been riding, and this might be why it's so irritating now that the confidence has dropped. But if you can do something else to get that calmness, whether it's listening to a meditation, loads of free ones on YouTube, a couple of free ones on my website, having mindful moments, doing some Tai Chi, whatever it might be for you, maybe it's reading a book, make sure to have time for that, because this is your health and this is also your life, your riding life. So it's really important. You might find that you like certain apps, or you like to listen to hypnotic music or something like that. The last thing that we need to do is to remember to stay self-compassionate, because you're not really losing your nerve. Your body is adapting to a new way of being, and it is a complete change in landscape for your body and your hormones, and things will get better. Now, if you'd like a handy PDF of this episode, just reach out to me, send me an email. My email is down in the description box, and I will send you a PDF so you can look at it and you can make some of the changes that you need to make. Do remember, if this has helped you in any way whatsoever, that you can easily share this podcast. You can rate the podcast. You can give me a like. You can send me an email. I really appreciate you listening to me today. Take care, and I'll see you again really soon.